Canto 9, Metropolis. Sing, commerce. Sing, machinery and markets. Be all my muses now, with your 9 daughters, specters who haunt the cities of the earth and frolic dance of death about the streams of asphalt. Heartlessness and avarice in New York arteries, ruin and spoil along the oily Gulf, stupidity and dysfunction clogged in litter of Potomac, and lethargy and waste, whose excess grace the man-made pools of gated quarters in suburbia. And last, young ugliness, queen of your daughters for her vast domain, whose spring is everywhere, whose ocean is the continents. Come, train me in your ways, that with your brutal pith, economy, I might in fewest words encapsulate modernity and sing its fresh decay. For now that parroting of grand design, that ordered farce, the false Empyrean, now all that drudgery about the void and gulf grew wild, and strew its tentacles, germ-like and viral, spreading arc on arc into the wasted cityscape, as out it swelled, throbbing, swollen with wind and light, and the thick stink of smoke for swirling up into the godless air. Across the fell and sweep of fields and hinterland it spans, erecting plants, throws factories up, and tiles the fallow meadows with its complexes of warehouses. By then, they all had tired of sweets. The thrill had worn away. And so, new flavors, blends, and brews and brands are made. New frenzies for the senses, stratagems for stranger ecstasies, a novel flash, savage enticements, and the lure of want alleviated by a stick of beef or gadgets of an afternoon. For these they toil the day, spill sweat and energy to medicate the nausea, drug the bleak malaise that swoons up from the undervoid and spoils a sick to be. I walked the streets. There were none listening to songs. The sun was high and glistening on the spokes of steel as I looked round and searched this rising world for kinder havens in our climbing city. In Parliament, the delegates had come, picked representatives to serve the will of those works drudgery preoccupied. And as their Congress met, I looked and saw the whole endeavor turned to carnival, mad circuses, pure absurdity, and all the world, warped to perversion, flipped, inverted, painted freak and jingle-hatted, as if the majesty of power played its backward joke in festivals of fools. With self-approving grins, the gaudy dome was nominating daily presidents from bums and oafish thespians. So fools were born in tinselled litters high, and set the laws, decreeing drinks for all, until the sun declined on daily legacies, to gild another coxcomb with a crown at morning's rising. Cretan ministers direct, ringleader-like, and guide the farce, corral the pageant of republic, smirk and game it in the halls of government as shepherds to this kangaroo burlesque. When now, out from the chaos of their muddle, the figure of a justice rises, mad, hair mats and gnarls, and a wild eye, which bugged from out its socket, piercing everything once free of blindfolds that still masked the other. Within her hand were iron sword and scales, and the small scale was sunken down. Thus formed, she flies throughout the world and shouts aloud, "Lions, hyenas, and hyenas, lions!" and with her scythe-like sword levels the peaks, and strikes the tips of mountain tops until all heights are low, and all the summits down. But out of Parliament, depravity and chaos of a different sort were raging. There, standing in the center square of this, man's infant city, shooting up from dust and crumbled rubble of our war, I looked and saw Salesman, unhindered by a law, erecting concrete blocks and towers, an endless spree of towers looming up, metal on glass and glass on metal, up, scraping the ash-burnt sky, high tops unseen. And all was shadow under metal there, within the dreary grid lines of the city. Elysian ruins, where they are not downed, become the hosts to parasites of steel, tumor additions to celestial frames twice crumbled on themselves. The rest are veiled, with all the treasures of the ancient faiths before, beneath an ocean of black tar and bitumen, as Salesman, with his purse of artists, paves the world and roads them over. So up from skeletons of beauty rise the towers, and the sacred riven world, shamed of its art, becomes efficiency for box on square on cubicle on cube, the squalid metal huts for every evil. Thus all was cast in shadow, endless dusk beneath the looming heights of glass and metal, until the sun, its brilliant beams so soon, so recently come up to lumine us, cut, severed by the scraper tops, the sun grew cold, and ceased its shining, and the globe, sputtering out, fell down, the burned-out sun declining, hurtling down a frozen ball and giant Pluto to the shaded gloom of nihil. And a new sun was set up, a vast electric planet launched to orbit, fueled by the deaths of ancient animals, men culled from depths of quarried earth, a moon of fire, and the blood-red glow, full blast of industry, new focus of the world. And Salesman saw that it was good, and smiled, and the mad lady was there too, and gave assent with crying, "Cotton t-shirts for $1, TV dinners for $10." And as I looked, I saw some scrambling horde who, smiling, bore the Christ head off, then set the dead thing up and, sitting opposite, hold talk with it. And all the sentiment recalled was that of children in a schoolyard, blind children, groping, sightless, who have dug a carcass up and, in their want for friends and playmates, set the sand for tea, to drink their empty cups and talk of foolish stuff with carrion. They laughed and hugged the head, called it their friend, and, though absurdity, by grimmest farces of the soul staved off depressions of the void. But then I looked, and saw a metal body given it, 8 legs arachnid-like, to serve as trunks mechanical to the unmoving head, that all about it goes, from megachurch to megachurch, a creeping spider-Christ the people worship with electric psalms. And everywhere its banners can be found, proclaiming faith in the undying Lord, as buck-toothed men in garish suits, amen, and program the Messiah's route. But then my gaze was torn away, for now, below our overworld, I looked and saw a beast rising from out the earth. A beast exploding from the continents, one leg from Beijing's factories, the other fixed upon New York. Its flesh was of false stone and asphalt, tail for mica, with a furnace maw that belched forth sulfur gas and steam. And as it rises up, bestriding the Pacific, it farts thick smog that dyes the atmosphere, while all its droppings fall into the sea. And as it rises up, it eats the earth, with salesmen dressed as blacksmiths, feeding heap on heap into its gaping maw. Its breath was black and hot, and scorched the temperature, such that the gardens and the meadows dry, and plains turned desert, deserts into fire, such that the species plenties decimates, and polar caps rescind, vast glacier ice, enormous calves, and crumbles to the waves, obliterated, and the seas, filled in, transgress the ancient boundaries, to flood the shorelines of the continents. But still it feeds, insatiable, till forest, stream, wood, meadow, jungle fall to fill it and us, its parasites. For now, on earth, bleach-coated armies run amok. Vast ranks of engineers and scientists pour vats and compounds on the earth and pull her wheat up over her head and plow her brutally with caustic engines. Every sense of awe, of reverence for the chthonic force and moss, of majesty at the savanna plains is lost, thrown down, deposed with God and nature, as earth, void of divinity, is made a tool or sold at market price as trade and cheap commodities. Her blooming stuff is poisoned out by chemicals, grown wide and disproportioned by the tampering of seed the salesman patents, frozen, boxed, and dieseled round a feasting world to serve half food and half a landfill. From the skies fall honeybees and butterflies, and fish die in the sea, beneath whose acid waves, formed by our bottles added daily, sweeps an archipelago of plastic waste that spans for miles. And the beast rose up, grew all the way into the overworld, suckled by cog on cog of human labor the mock Empyrean partitioned out. So can whole continents be subjugated, and our one planet die efficiently, as all its population plays their part, and none who kill consider it a crime. And the mad lady overhead, her hills detritus leveled, fed the dark behemoth. Bushels of corn and nickel, barrels of rich corn syrup for a cent. Indeed, the ancient, holy, sacred earth herself, long nurturer and mother, strange to think, seemed any minute now as it would break its orbit, hurtle off, and broken sink forever into shadow. Then I looked, and saw the bastard offspring of the artists who recently had slaughtered heaven, filthed and uglied in the city of the world, whose towers propped them up, and they, in turn, the towers. Frothing feral, werewolf-like, they swaggered naked in the glitter of the night, and howled, gashing their testicles in happenings, and mopped their vomit up with tattered canvases. As advertised, post-metaist musicians gained a crowd by beating sticks sporadically on stones and dirt, the watchers nodding, whispering delight and awe at these philosophers' bold questioning of time. Another stood without a hint of sound, and with no voice or movement sang an anthem silently, whose composition earned him great report, as others whined and wished they'd written it. Painters and sculptors likewise prowled around. One held a rock and shouted, "Masterpiece!" with pride, while just beside the other stooped and, shitting on a pedestal, was hailed with jubilee the Michelangelos of modern times. So all this rumpus, wild, crude, childish fury raged at show fools, while in the windows of the galleries still others took their pleasure and their fame, gang-raping angel corpses for shock and spectacle, as wallets grew, and Salesman made his share by selling gawks and gapers entry to the exhibition. "I hear 100 million now," he cries. "Do I hear 2?" Just then, as I stood watching, I heard the headline blaze from every shop and storefront hawking screens, the state declare the end of history. "We've made it! Bless the salesman! Bless the beast!" To which grand choir came grinding harmonies. "The past oppresses," proclaimed the congressmen and pundits, joined by anxious artists and the influence of academes. So Parliament now votes that all the libraries be set ablaze, museums raided, and their art destroyed. For all the old must pass away, to purge the stain unequal out of every page, and lead humanity, or something like it, by way of purest metal and the light of shiny things. And heaping pyres are raised in front of Parliament, torched by the fire, and readied for the annals, chronicles, the Botticellis, Michelangelos, and all such vanities of time. Around these hellish flames I saw what seemed to be self-flagellates, as in medieval days, beating their skin with "mea culpa" cries, as some salvation from their privileges. They could not be consoled. Their ire ran deep, racked by a guilt which now these flames might ease. And so, in search of enemies, within and out, they march away, in single file, schooled in resentment to their history, and burning now to burn their birthright up and seek some tinder in the canon. I, behind them, following, to see what end awaited, and what source their hating had, for soon their destination came to view. On fields oasis green, bound in by dunes of endless tar and bitumen, I glimpsed what seemed some regal church of rock, an old Gothic cathedral, bombed-out spires of stone ascending their medieval spikes to heaven, though heaven now was far below, while it had left this massive remnant relic-like for those who'd come to crucify it. There, inside its charcoal towers, scholars slumped, played coronor to severed flowers, graphed emotion, counted stars, each goggled face the single lonely tenant of a spire, the magisters and mad-haired doctors, priests of knowledge. This was the dark camp, the refuge fortress that Faust, rebuffed from Parliament, erected as his outpost. He, inside the highest soaring steeple, stood and eyed his university, pacing his cone, his room above the clouds, interrogates reality, and sees it all dissolve. For there men follow reason to the fringe, critique's frontiers, to logic's logical extreme. And as they do, all things concrete crumble, walls, bricks disintegrate, hands' pens they pen conclusions with erode, and then conclusions follow. All is turned to holes, as words turn meaningless, and all the world to ash, and ash to nothingness. And yet, below, in glitzy convocations held in hall, nothing is more material. There Salesman ushers in the youth with cap and gown to fat the spires of learning, fat the college coffers, fat the beast to fat the masses better through the industry of art and science, arts and sciences to fatten industry. And Parliament agrees, and prints more dollar scholarships, and the mad lady followed, singing "Lauda for paying," and then "Magna cum laude for showing up." I came then through this maze of grit, skyscrapers slitted row on low and grids of towers, close and metal rigid, thinking the while on old Elysium, its high resplendence and its architecture. I came through this at last, to stand and look in horror out at the expanse of waste and emptiness that is the dismal Sprawl. It rings our wretched mother city mile on mile, and lane on lane of fast food drive-up, streetlight by streetlight, mall on mall on mall of taupe-hued discount shops and retailers in shoddy glare and sign, plaza on plaza, and the whole gray colony swarming slow to lap their GDP, transcendent. God, I whispered then. Though God was nowhere there within this hell of human making. God was in the hell of our forgetting, housed somewhere at least in crystal wreckages of heaven. Hell's more beautiful than this, the endless shit of modern living. Here, in opulent squalor, the veterans of war with him reside in house on house on house on house. Equation neighborhoods of geometric tar and light, arrayed ad infinitum, like computer chips, one soulless, lightless box repeated out as to eternity. I stood and stared, but could not comprehend. The coming night was heavy with the smell of processed meat and pipe exhaust. Bright neons, prostitutes blared garish down the strip, and all the air was buzzing with a static hum as I, surprised to see 100 million eyes at every window, turned my eyes with them up into the shadows of the sky, traced gazes up to see what held their sight, who eye the heavens longingly for law. There, in the night, the beast loomed over all, the only lord or emperor whose voice could muster multitudes, and on its chest harsh screens blared falsest promises, the mouths of salesmen goading more and more and more, while the mute seekers gazed in stupor. There they learned directions how to feed it, how there was still more for them, still more in life, beyond the gaping nothing of abysm. And with these answers gladly found and treasured, and with a plan of buying more tomorrow, self long forgotten, seared into their flesh its slogans, trademarks, logos for themselves, sleek barcodes for identity, and script for being. All have freedom, lulled the beast. Amen, the people. All have freedom, swooned the lady of the scales. Amen, agreed. And Salesman, too, bait switching with volition, shouts, All have freedom, in the marketplace, as man's amen, with Congress echoing, quaked all the powdered ash still simmering in cinders of Elysium. But what could I do? What place had I in this, our putrid sty of plutarchy? This dark, unfeeling factory existence, hand to mouth, apocalypse of meaning. Where, in all the parliaments, the galleries, the towers, wealth and Babylon of this new world, this modern epoch, born of war, where was poetry? Where songs of life, souls' sacred joys, casting their light of beauty on the darkness of the earth? In which high tower was some purpose kept? In which repeated district worth? Where now, in all the brute efficiency and laws of men, the truths of science, or the sense of our own senselessness, where now were we? Where was humanity, our higher selves? Where now was some sublimity? Where now was God? Then I remembered him, the victim of our rise, the sacrifice and hecatomb for this, our botched salvation. And as I stood there somberly and eyed the world we'd won, my heart leapt up and beat a gulping, nauseous drum that burst contained meandering to claustrophobia for wind and stars. I ran. Half wild with dark and desperation, into shadow then I ran, and sought escape, sought out an exit from the gray drug and deadening of life that's life sans song and meaningless. I ran all night, one hand for clutching at my heart and one my harp, dodging the cratered voids and bomb-hole pockmarks from the war, which span their studded chasms across more track than I'd imagined, running, till the reach of tar and asphalt die away, and I am left, at last, before the sprawl's great boundary, a break. I paused, amazed by forest leaves, to see some green thing swayed by wind and catch the falling of the moonlight on its stems like drops of silver on a maple skin. Then, with a panting gaze thrown back, I leapt inside and on into the thickening wood, descending, gulping, grated by the sticks and knotted thicket of the liminal and wild. Breathless I ran, and through the trees made way, enveloped quickly by the gloom of adumbrating leaves and limbs, which wept their darkness over darkness shed by night and purple clouds that masked the stars and moon. Downward, into a sloping dale, I ran, in search of silence to the moon-gilt trees, until, with heavy breaths and grunts, I came, even here, upon a void, beside whose massive crater I collapsed at last to breathe. I lay some time. The wind hushed over leaves, and, overhead, thin clouds swam lazily in the dark water sea that drowned the night and washed the sky in ink like gobs of death's calligraphy. I lay and sighed a while. Then, reaching for the lip of that great circular abyss, I crawled myself that I might see, might peer through it and ponder its extremest point, to shores beyond nihility. There, in the blank and black, was nothing to be seen. A void descending into void, in emptiness and perpetuity. I strained my eyes. I strove to plumb its depths, to understand the end of everything and know it best of men. Lost in the hollows of its night, in dusks and shadow, fadings off, and sleep so dreamless that existence seems to nod, I let my eyes drop downward to the spot where truth had torn to empty too. But there was nothing. So I strained my gaze until my gaze tore through. There, in the dim, a shape, a form, a hazy blur of line and color coming up. From the dark mists and the black fog, an image disobscured and slowly unencumbered of the night, comes God, Lord in a land of shade and shadows, transcendence in eclipse. But could it be? Oh, revolution, look on this. Our God far off in underworlds? Hidden in haunts and covered by the mist? For what? For what? For candy, shit, and license. Oh, I seethed to see him there, in disbelief, and reeled, broke off my gaze with darkness where he lay, and wept among the columbines. Unfair, I thought, that such bleak end should be his fate, that gloom his grave, who once was all the light that lit the universe. Unfair. But then I realized, who would give him grace? Who else would come to eulogize, to praise? Who else but me? And so I have. And so I near the stitching up, concluding how I got here, fulfilling vows to answer for his death, and down to Elysium. I pray it serves. I pray this song was worthy of the cause and worthy worship. For the god is dead, and muses cannot call it good, and spirit which lies with him cannot inspire, or say, well done, my good and faithful servant. I'm alone. Alone in woods I cannot keep, in which I cannot stay beyond tomorrow. For all my mourning of this emperor, whom I would take back, prodigal and pigged with messy letdown though he be, and hug his failure and forgiveness, till he blush and rule embarrassed, yet imperial. Thus ends my song, and so shall I be done with singing. Song is dead in such an age, and I can be no necromancer now, for I have come here but to say goodbye, and eulogize conclusively the shade of harmony, the sleeping sacred. Lord, Creator, no, a father once to me. To him I've offered up this final song, on mandolin strings strained by eagerness and disillusion, tears for what's long gone and will be gone, a poetry of pain. I here devote this final symphony to eulogize your shade. So ends my song, so God is dead, and I am late for leaving. The first red rays of sunrise sliver through. I step back from the void and look away. Then, with some sad resolve, I raise my arm to hurl this harp forever lost within. Except a sudden flash of shadow stirs and catches corner visions of my eye. I turn and see it, halfway up the knoll, there, like some double of the void that's here, an animal of ending. Shapeless black and fog negation, looming breathless. Blank, it haunts the hill. This bare oblivion, this thing I think was rumored of in heaven. A demon loosed when we cut loose our chains? Transcendence lost and heaven killed. Is this our fate? Our clothes for so long overcloaked? Is this best consequence of tragedy? A gray within a shroud to shroud eternity? I can't quite move. Its toxin hovers from the way I'd go, blocking return. Its boards brood in me, a damning into nothingness so bleak that I, in seeing, nearly break for want of afterlife. I vacillate from it to void, from it to God, and leaping down into the pit in search of heaven, death, or purpose. For might he not be returned? Can Brutus beg forgiveness? Cassius cry and put the stabs of Caesar back in knives that worked his ending? Judas pluck the nails and stitch his side, and with no hint or sense but love when kissing, smile and say, "Hail, Master," and make his king uncrucified? Could I descend and harrow hell for saviors I set free? I stand and gaze into the void, beneath whose vast abyss a god is kept. Once more we'll sing. The music recrescendos. Once more there will be thunder in the skies. A tumbled monarch, rent of scepter, lies not banished down forever, but will rise and shake the heavens with his coming up. So, with a final glance thrown towards the wood, whose branches clothe the failings of our time, I step up to the void that pox this realm, and hurl myself into the underworld.